My name is Ulysses Walker, 32 years old, and self-made since 13 when I started fixing computers in our garage. By 25, I'd built a multi-million-dollar tech company, paid off debts my family forced on me, and bought my dream house with cash. I thought I'd escaped the toxicity of my past. Then came the certified letter my parents and sister were suing me for what they called taking the life my sister deserved. Before I tell you how my own blood betrayed me, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe to join me on this wild journey. Trust me, you won't believe what happened next. Growing up in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, was like watching the American dream rust away in real time. Our town had been built around the steelworks factory, which had been slowly dying since the 80s. By the time I was born in the early 90s, the place was on life support, with layoffs announced every other month. My dad Harold worked double shifts whenever he could, coming home with hands so calloused they felt like sandpaper when he'd ruffle my hair. Mom Patricia, to everyone but her regular customers at Dot's Diner, worked part-time serving breakfast and lunch, though there were weeks when she wouldn't get out of bed. The doctor called it depression, but nobody talked about that in our house. Money was always tight, bills stacked on the kitchen counter like playing cards in a losing hand. The tension in our small 3-bedroom ranch house was thick enough to cut with a knife. The brightest spot in my parents' lives was my sister Amber. 3 years younger than me, she was everything. I wasn't in their eyes focused, disciplined, and academically gifted. Where I fidgeted through classes, she sat perfectly still. While I brought home C's and D's alongside occasional teacher notes about not living up to potential, Amber collected gold stars and perfect attendance certificates. My parents made no secret of their preference. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the unofficial family motto before Amber even hit double digits. I knew I was different early on. Instead of sports or playing with action figures, I was fascinated by how things worked. I'd take apart old alarm clocks, remote controls, anything with buttons and wires. This drive to understand the inner workings of devices wasn't appreciated when family appliances ended up disassembled. "There goes Einstein again, breaking perfectly good stuff," my dad would mutter when he'd find me surrounded by parts. In 5th grade, a teacher suggested I might have ADHD and recommended testing. My parents refused. "That's just an excuse for laziness," my father declared over dinner that night. "Walker men don't make excuses. We work harder." So I struggled through classes that couldn't hold my attention, finding solace only in the computer lab during lunch breaks. Mr. Harrington, the computer teacher, was the first adult who didn't treat my curiosity as a defect. He let me stay after school, sometimes teaching me basic programming and letting me help rebuild donated computers for the lab. The catalyst that changed everything happened when I was 13. Walking home from school, I spotted our neighbor, Mr. Gaines, putting out trash, including a damaged laptop. When I asked if I could have it, he laughed. "Coffee spilled all over it. Repair shop wanted $200 to fix it. Might as well get a new one. Take it if you want, kid." That laptop became my obsession. Every day after school, I'd head to the public library to use their internet connection, searching forums about laptop repair. I checked out books with titles like Computer Repair Fundamentals and Electronics Troubleshooting. The librarian, Mrs. Fenton, started saving technical magazines for me. 3 weeks later, after carefully disassembling the laptop, drying and cleaning each component, and replacing a few damaged parts with ones I'd salvaged from an old desktop in our garage, I got it working. The moment that screen lit up felt like the first time I'd taken a full breath. My first customer found me by accident. Mrs. Gaines saw the repaired laptop and mentioned it to her friend, whose son's computer had a virus. She knocked on our door one afternoon, offering $50 if I could fix it. I printed flyers at the library, "Computer Problems Ulysses Can Help," and put them up at the grocery store and community center. Within 2 weeks, I had 5 clients, mostly older folks with virus-laden computers or devices they didn't know how to use. I set up a small workbench in the corner of our garage, using a plastic folding table and old desk lamp. My parents were less than supportive. "That little hobby of yours is taking up space for my tools," Dad complained, though his toolbox had been gathering dust since I could remember. When I brought home my first $200, proudly displaying the cash at the dinner table, Mom's eyes lit up briefly before she exchanged glances with Dad. "Well, now that you're earning money, you should start contributing to the household," she said, taking half of my earnings for room and board. This became the pattern. As more neighbors and their friends brought me their technical problems, more of my earnings disappeared into my parents' pockets. I started keeping a separate lockbox hidden beneath the loose floorboard under my bed, saving about 30% of everything I made. "When are you going to grow out of this phase and focus on school?" Mom would ask while simultaneously depositing my money into their account. Meanwhile, they bought Amber a new scientific calculator and paid for her science camp without hesitation. I learned early that in our house there were two standards of living, Amber's and mine. I also learned that if I wanted anything different for myself, I'd have to build it with my own hands. By 14, word about my repair skills had spread beyond our immediate neighborhood. The local pharmacy owner brought in his ancient desktop that ran their inventory system. The flower shop needed help setting up an email account. The real turning point came when I fixed the router at Hometown Bakery and Mrs. Johnson mentioned she wanted a website. "Do you do that too?" she asked, offering me a free donut as she explained her vision. I didn't, but I was going to learn. The library became my second home as I taught myself HTML and CSS through outdated books and whatever tutorials I could find on the glacially slow public computers. 3 weeks later, Mrs. Johnson had a simple but functional website showcasing her baked goods with a contact form for special orders. That first website led to 5 more within 2 months. Small business owners in Millbrook had been quoted thousands by professional design firms in larger cities. I charged $300 and threw in basic maintenance. It wasn't just about the money. I loved seeing these small businesses get excited about joining the digital world. Their genuine appreciation was addictive after years of feeling like the family disappointment. As orders increased, I could no longer handle everything alone. Daniel Friedman, a quiet kid from my grade, who was similarly dismissed by our teachers as underperforming, became my first assistant. He had an eye for design that complemented my technical skills, and we split the profits 60-40 on website projects he helped with. "You're paying him?" my father asked incredulously when I mentioned hiring help. "You're just kids playing business." But we weren't playing. By 15, I was making more money than my mother's part-time job, though my parents still took their share without fail. Everything changed when my science teacher, Mr. Bowen, encouraged me to enter the Northeastern Youth Business Competition. My entry, a portfolio of websites and repair services under the name Digital Solutions, won second place and a $500 prize. More importantly, it introduced me to Frank Phillips, a retired software developer who volunteered as a judge. "You've got raw talent, kid," Frank told me after the ceremony. "But you need direction." Frank became the mentor I desperately needed, meeting with me weekly at the local coffee shop. Under his guidance, I began learning JavaScript and Python, moving beyond static websites into building actual applications. When I created a simple scheduling app for the local barbershop at 15, Frank helped me understand how to structure the code properly and add features that made it truly useful. "You're thinking like a user, not just a programmer," he noted with approval. "That's rarer than you think." My expanding skills and growing client list should have been a source of family pride. Instead, they became a source of tension. As my small business bank account grew, opened with Frank's help since I was underage, my parents' demands increased proportionally. "The roof needs repairs. We're taking $800 this month," Dad announced one evening, not even framing it as a request anymore. Meanwhile, Amber had grown resentful of the attention I received from my growing list of clients. Though still the academic star, she seemed bothered by my independent success. "It's not fair," I overheard her complaining to Mom. "Everyone's talking about Ulysses and his stupid computers now." The situation worsened when Dad borrowed my business laptop one weekend and returned it with beer spilled on the keyboard. When I tried to explain how important that tool was for my livelihood, He dismissed my concerns. "You can just fix it, right? Isn't that what you do?" My parents maintained a strange dichotomy, simultaneously dismissing my business as a temporary hobby, while depending on the income it generated. At family gatherings, Mom would minimize my work, telling relatives, "Oh, he's just going through a phase with all this computer stuff. He'll grow out of it." This dismissal stung particularly because my grades continued to suffer as I balanced school with growing business demands. The principal called me into his office during sophomore year, suggesting I might consider dropping out since I clearly wasn't college material. The irony that I was making more money than his monthly salary wasn't lost on me. When I discovered online education options that would allow me to complete high school on a flexible schedule, my parents refused to sign the permission forms. "No son of mine is dropping out to play on computers all day," Dad declared, ignoring that my playing was helping keep the lights on. The true betrayal came shortly after my 16th birthday. A credit card statement arrived addressed to me for an account I'd never opened. Then another. And another. 3 different cards, all maxed out, totaling over $37,000 of debt in my name. When I confronted my parents at the kitchen table, they didn't even deny it. "We needed to get Amber into Westridge Prep," Mom explained, referencing the private school 2 towns over. "And the car needed replacing. Your business gave us good credit and we used it." "You stole my identity," I said, still struggling to process the magnitude of what they'd done. "Don't be so dramatic," Dad dismissed with a wave. "It's all in the family. You've been taking advantage of living here rent-free for years. I pay you hundreds of dollars every month. And now you'll pay a little more," he shrugged. "Consider it evening things out for all we've done for your sister." That night, staring at the ceiling of my small bedroom, I realized my parents didn't see me as someone to nurture and support. They saw me as a resource to exploit. The credit card discovery changed everything. After a sleepless night, I called Frank and asked if we could meet urgently. Over coffee at the diner, where Mom thankfully wasn't working that day, I spread the statements before him. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, examining the documents. "This is identity theft, Ulysses." "They're my parents," I replied weakly. "Doesn't matter. This is illegal, and it's going to destroy your credit before you even get started in life." Frank put me in touch with Catherine Lopez, a lawyer friend who occasionally took pro bono cases. She reviewed my situation and explained my limited options: file criminal charges against my parents, which I couldn't bring myself to do, or pursue legal emancipation. Emancipation would legally separate you from your parents before you turn 18, she explained. You'd be responsible for yourself, but they would no longer have legal control over your finances or decisions. Over the next 2 months, I meticulously documented everything: the unauthorized credit cards, years of contributions to household expenses, bank statements showing consistent business income, and even recordings of conversations where my filters' parents discussed using my earnings for Amber's education. The hardest part was deciding to go through with it. Despite everything, they were still my family. But when I discovered Mom had applied for a 4th credit card in my name, the decision made itself. The day my parents were served court papers, the house exploded in chaos. "You ungrateful little," Dad couldn't even finish his sentence, his face purple with rage. Amber, now 15, stood in the doorway of the kitchen, tears streaming down her face. "How could you do this to us? We're your family." "I didn't do anything to you," I replied, feeling strangely calm. "I'm just trying to protect myself." The emancipation hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. I stayed with Frank during that time, sleeping on his couch and running my business from his dining room table. My parents tried everything, calling my clients to tell them I was unstable, showing up at Frank's house, demanding I return home, and even sending the family pastor to convince me I was violating the commandment to honor my father, mother. In the courthouse, Mom played the devastated parent, expertly dabbing at non-existent tears while explaining how worried they'd been about my obsession with computers. "We were just trying to help him by taking control of his finances," she told the judge. "He's only 16. Amber's testimony hurt the most. "He's always been jealous of me," she claimed, voice quavering. Now he's abandoning our family when we need him most. But the evidence spoke for itself. The unauthorized credit cards, the bank statements, the recorded conversations. Judge Winters, a stern woman with silver-rimmed glasses, reviewed everything carefully before delivering her verdict. Based on the evidence presented, it's clear to this court that the petitioner has demonstrated both the maturity and financial independence required for emancipation. Furthermore, there appears to be a pattern of financial exploitation that makes the current living situation untenable. She looked directly at my parents. Petition for emancipation is granted. Just like that, at 17, I was legally an adult. The weeks that followed were simultaneously freeing and terrifying. Frank helped me find a small studio apartment above Thompson's hardware store where I set up my business properly. I filed paperwork establishing Ulysses Digital Solutions as a legal entity and opened new business accounts that my parents couldn't access. The financial reality was sobering. After rent and business expenses, nearly every remaining dollar went to minimum payments on the credit card debt. I developed a color-coded spreadsheet tracking every expense, projecting how long it would take to clear the debt my family had saddled me with. The initial estimate, 7 years. While I'd gained independence, I'd lost my family. My parents refused to speak to me, and Amber blocked my number. The holidays that first year were particularly difficult. I worked through Thanksgiving and Christmas, taking on extra projects to stay busy and increase my debt payments. The turning point for my business came 6 months after the emancipation. A local restaurant owner needed more than just a website. He wanted a full online ordering system. This was beyond my current skills, but I wasn't about to turn down the challenge. For 2 weeks, I barely slept learning database management and payment processing integration. When the system launched successfully, I realized I'd stumbled onto a much more lucrative business model. Website design had become increasingly commoditized, but custom business applications, that was a different market entirely. I pivoted, focusing exclusively on developing practical software solutions for small businesses. My first major success was an inventory management system designed specifically for independent retailers. After implementing it at 3 local stores, with dramatic improvements in their efficiency, word spread rapidly. By 18, I needed help managing the growing workload. I hired 3 part-time developers, all college students from the nearby community college, paying them fair wages while teaching them the practical skills their courses often overlooked. We worked out of my expanded office space, which now took up the entire floor above the hardware store. The local business journal ran a feature on my company, dubbing me Millbrook's Tech Wonderkind. The irony wasn't lost on me. Many of the same people who had dismissed me as a troubled underachiever were now asking for business cards at community events. My reputation grew beyond our small town. I was invited to speak at the state's annual entrepreneurship conference, sharing my experience building custom business solutions for underserved markets. After my presentation, a representative from TechCore, a regional technology company, approached me with an acquisition offer. "We've been watching your work," he said, sliding a folder across the table, with numbers that made my eyes widen. I considered it briefly before declining. This business wasn't just my livelihood, it was my vindication. I wasn't ready to hand it over to someone else, not when we were just hitting our stride. As my 19th birthday approached, we expanded into adjacent office space, knocking down walls to create an open-concept workspace for my growing team. The small-town kid whose parents thought he was wasting his time playing with computers now signed the front of paychecks and made decisions that affected other people's livelihoods. The debt, however, remained a constant shadow. Every month I made payments far exceeding the minimums, but the balances decreased frustratingly slowly. The cards my parents had opened carried interest rates that bordered on predatory, and despite my success, banks viewed me as a credit risk because of the high utilization rate. Still, for the first time since discovering those credit card statements, I could see a path forward. I was building something meaningful, something entirely my own. The family that had dismissed and exploited me could no longer reach into my pockets or control my future. As I closed out my financial spreadsheet one night, updating the debt payoff projections, I realized something important. I was no longer defined by what had been done to me. I was defined by what I was building for myself. My 19th birthday came and went without a card from my family, but I barely noticed. I was too consumed by a new idea that had been forming in my mind for months. Working with so many small businesses had revealed a consistent problem. They struggled to compete with larger chains when it came to customer loyalty programs. The big companies had sophisticated apps and reward systems. Local shops were still using paper punch cards. Over a weekend brainstorming session fueled by energy drinks and Take Out My Team, and I sketched out the concept for Local Boost, a unified loyalty platform that would allow small businesses to offer a shared rewards program. Customers could earn points across different local businesses, creating a network effect that benefited everyone involved. We built the prototype in 2 months, working nights and weekends. The initial version was rough but functional, allowing customers to scan QR codes at participating businesses and track their rewards through a simple mobile interface. We launched with just 8 Millbrook businesses, including Mrs. Johnson's Bakery, my first website client years earlier. What happened next stunned even me. The app saw 500 downloads in the first week, then 2,000 by month's end. Local news picked up the story, and suddenly businesses from neighboring towns were calling, asking how they could join. 3 months after launch, Local Boost was operating in 3 major cities across the state, with a wait list of businesses wanting to join. Frank, who had been watching my progress with paternal pride, connected me with his former colleague who now worked for a venture capital firm. They invest in early-stage tech companies, he explained. Your Local Boost has serious potential. The meeting with Excel Partners was intimidating. 5 serious investors around a conference table, all at least 20 years my senior. I walked them through Local Boost's growth metrics, explaining our vision for creating an ecosystem that helps small businesses compete collectively against large corporations. We're interested, their lead partner said after my presentation, but we typically take a controlling stake in companies at your stage. The offer was substantial, $2 million for 60% ownership. It would solve my financial problems overnight, but I'd be giving up control of my creation. After 3 sleepless nights, considering the offer, I countered with a different proposal. $1 million for 25%, with specific protections written into the agreement, ensuring I remained CEO with final product decisions. To my surprise, they accepted with one additional condition. I needed to move the company headquarters to Pittsburgh to access better talent. At 20, I packed up my life in Millbrook and relocated to the city, bringing my core team with me. The investment accelerated everything. Our team grew from 7 to 15 within 3 months, then to 25 by the end of the year. We leased proper office space in a converted warehouse downtown, with exposed brick walls and those Silicon Valley-style amenities I'd only seen in magazines, snack bars, collaborative spaces, and even a small game room. Local Boost expanded rapidly, launching in 20 cities within a year of funding. Our revenue model was working businesses paid monthly subscription fees, plus a small percentage of transactions processed through the platform. As we crossed the $1 million annual revenue threshold, I found myself leading meetings with people twice my age, making decisions that affected thousands of users and hundreds of businesses. This rapid growth forced me to evolve as a leader. I hired an executive coach, Jonathan Murray, who had worked with tech founders for over 20 years. Our weekly sessions focused less on business strategy and more on personal development, managing stress, communicating effectively with different personality types, and handling the increasing public attention. The skills that got you here won't get you to the next level. Jonathan frequently reminded me, you need to transition from founder to CEO. Despite external success, I struggled internally with imposter syndrome. In meetings with investors or potential partners, I constantly felt they would discover I was just a kid who taught himself to code, not a real technology executive. It didn't help that I was invariably the youngest person in these rooms, often by decades. Jonathan helped me work through these feelings, encouraging me to embrace my unconventional background rather than hiding it. Your story is your strength, he insisted. Most people in these rooms came from privilege. You built this from nothing with everyone against you. Own that. Gradually, I found my voice as a leader. I built meaningful friendships within the tech community, particularly with other young founders who understood the unique pressures we faced. For the first time since leaving home, I had people in my life who knew me as more than just the computer guy or the whiz kid. While my company grew, I maintained laser focus on my personal finances. With advice from a financial advisor, I developed an aggressive plan to eliminate the credit card debt my parents had created. I lived well below my means, taking a modest salary, despite the company's success, and directing every additional dollar toward debt repayment. The day I made the final payment, nearly 3 years ahead of my original projection, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the account paid in full notices. At 23, I was finally free of the financial burden my family had placed on me. I celebrated by taking my entire team out for dinner, though I didn't share the personal significance of the date. With the debt cleared, I could finally begin building my own financial future. I worked with my advisors to create a balanced approach, reinvesting in the company, building personal savings, and making my first investments. On my 24th birthday, I purchased my first rental property, a small duplex that would generate passive income regardless of what happened with Local Boost. The company continued its upward trajectory, expanding to over 100 cities and crossing $10 million in annual revenue. We were featured in national technology publications, and I was invited to speak at major industry conferences. Occasionally, I wondered if my family saw these articles or heard about my success through the Millbrook grapevine. As I approached 25, I decided it was time to put down permanent roots. Though I maintained my apartment in Pittsburgh near the office, I began looking for a place that would truly feel like home. After months of searching, I found a historic craftsman home on 3 acres just outside the city. Built in the 1920s, it had character and history, but needed significant updates. The asking price was steep, but well within my means. After years of financial discipline, I had saved enough to make an offer in cash, avoiding a mortgage entirely. Walking through the empty house after closing, running my hand along the original woodwork, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was mine, paid for entirely by my own efforts, a physical manifestation of overcoming every obstacle placed in my path. The renovation process took 6 months, during which I worked closely with contractors to preserve the home's historic character while modernizing the infrastructure. I converted one wing into a home office with state-of-the-art technology, created a library filled with the books I'd always wanted to own, and designed an expansive kitchen, despite rarely cooking anything more complicated than pasta. When the work was finally complete, I hosted a housewarming party for my team and friends. As everyone explored the space offering compliments and congratulations, I found myself standing alone on the back porch looking out over the property in the fading evening light. Frank joined me, handing me a glass of whiskey. "You've come a long way from that garage workbench," he said quietly. "Sometimes I can't believe it myself," I admitted. "Your parents. Haven't heard from them in years." He nodded, understanding the complicated emotions beneath that simple statement. "You built something remarkable, Ulysses. Not just the company, this life." I raised my glass slightly, to proving them wrong. Frank shook his head gently. "No, to proving yourself right." That night, after everyone had left, I walked through each room of my empty house, trying to absorb the reality that this was mine, not just the property, but the life I had constructed. The following morning, I woke up in my new home for the first time, free of debt, financially secure, and surrounded by the fruits of my own labor. I had no idea that across the state, in the small town I'd left behind, the family that had once exploited my success was already planning their return to my life. For nearly 7 years after my emancipation, my contact with my family had been limited to secondhand information. Occasionally, a client from Millbrook would mention seeing my parents or hearing about Amber. I learned she'd graduated from Westridge Prep and gone on to State University, eventually landing a job at an accounting firm in Philadelphia. My parents had struggled after the factory finally closed for good, though. Dad had found work as a maintenance supervisor at a shopping center. I maintained a deliberate distance, focusing on building my company and my new life. The pain of their betrayal had dulled over time, transforming from an acute ache into a background hum I could mostly ignore. This carefully maintained separation shattered with the arrival of a cream-colored envelope in my mail, addressed in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a wedding invitation: Amber Louise Walker and Justin Thomas Reynolds. Request the honor of your presence as they join their lives in matrimony. I stared at the invitation for a long time, tracing my sister's name with my finger. We'd been close once before academic expectations and parental favoritism had driven a wedge between us. The last time I'd seen her, she'd been testifying against me in court, tears streaming down her face as she accused me of abandoning the family. Why invite me now, after all these years of silence? For weeks, I debated whether to attend. My therapist, whom I'd been seeing since the lawsuit stress had triggered anxiety attacks, encouraged me to consider what I hoped to gain from going. This isn't about what they deserve, Dr. Phillips reminded me during our session. It's about what serves your well-being. As the RSVP deadline approached, I finally checked "will attend" on the response card. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe some lingering hope for resolution. Either way, I was going back to face the family that had tried to build their lives at my expense. Selecting an appropriate gift proved challenging. I wanted something that acknowledged Amber's milestone without being ostentatious or revealing too much about my financial situation. Eventually, I settled on a mid-range stand mixer from their registry and a handwritten card congratulating the couple. The wedding was scheduled at a country club near Millbrook, nothing extravagant but certainly more upscale than I would have expected given my parents' financial situation. I booked a room at a nearby hotel rather than staying with family or friends, giving myself the option to retreat if things became uncomfortable. Walking into the rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding felt surreal. Familiar faces from childhood looked at me with expressions ranging from surprise to calculation. Conversations hushed momentarily when I entered, then resumed with forced casualness. My parents approached stiffly, as though following a script. Dad had aged significantly, his hair now completely gray, shoulders slightly stooped. Mom had put on weight but maintained the same perfectly styled hair and careful makeup I remembered. "Ulysses," she said, her voice formal. "We're glad you could come." "Congratulations," I replied, equally formal. "Amber looks happy." "She is," Dad nodded, keeping a careful distance. "She's done well for herself." The interaction was painfully polite, lacking any acknowledgement of our history or the years of separation. They introduced me to Justin's parents as Amber's brother who works in computers, a description so understated it bordered on comical, given the company's current valuation. Amber's greetings seemed genuinely warmer. She hugged me briefly, pulling back to study my face. "You look good, Yuli," she said, using my childhood nickname for the first time in over a decade. "Thanks for coming. It means a lot." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied automatically, though we both knew that wasn't true. I could have very easily missed this event, as I'd missed every other family milestone for years. Throughout the evening, I maintained a careful distance, making polite conversation with extended family and old neighbors while observing the dynamics around me. Something felt off, though. I couldn't immediately identify what. The wedding seemed more expensive than expected, from the premium open bar to the elaborate floral arrangements. Justin, who Amber had mentioned worked in pharmaceutical sales, wore a watch I recognized as costing several $1,000s. The ceremony the following day was beautiful, with Amber radiant in a designer gown. I kept to myself at the reception, seated at a table with distant cousins who asked superficial questions about my life in Pittsburgh. As the evening progressed, I circulated through the crowd, catching fragments of conversations that increasingly piqued my interest. Near the bar, I overheard my Uncle Thomas speaking with another relative. "Now that Ulysses is back in the picture, boy's done well for himself. Has an obligation to help family now, especially with Harold's situation. What situation, I wondered, moving away before they noticed me listening. Later during the bouquet toss, I overheard two of Amber's bridesmaids whispering, "Honeymoon in Bali for 3 weeks. Must be nice. Think her brother paid for it." Throughout the evening, I pieced together concerning information. My sister and her new husband appeared to be living significantly above what their stated professions should allow. The designer clothes luxury honeymoon plans and casual mentions of their new house in an upscale Philadelphia suburb didn't align with their reported incomes. Most surprising was learning that my parents had recently purchased a new home, despite Dad's complaint during a toast about working-class struggles. When I casually asked a family friend about it, she mentioned they'd moved about 6 months ago to a lovely place in the new development on the north side of town. As the reception wound down, I said my goodbyes, exchanging contact information with Amber and promising vaguely to keep in touch. The drive back to my hotel was filled with unsettled thoughts. Something calculated had been happening throughout the wedding, a performance of reconciliation that felt hollow and strategic. 3 weeks later, as Amber and Justin enjoyed their Bali honeymoon according to the vacation photos she'd tagged me in online, a courier delivered a thick envelope to my home office. Inside was a legal document with the heading, "Complaint for Compensatory Damages," listing Harold Walker, Patricia Walker, and Amber Walker Reynolds as plaintiffs and me as the defendant. The lawsuit alleged that my success was built upon sacrifices made by the Walker family and demanded compensation for their critical early investments in my business and career development. Most shocking was Amber's affidavit, which stated I had taken the life that should have been hers by monopolizing family resources during my teenage years. They were demanding 30% of my company's value and $5 million in personal compensation. As I flipped through page after page of fabricated claims and twisted versions of my childhood, the wedding invitation suddenly made perfect sense. It hadn't been about reconciliation. It had been reconnaissance, gathering information and creating a narrative of family reunion before launching their attack. My sister's tearful courtroom testimony years ago hadn't been the end of my family's attempts to profit from my success. It had merely been a prelude. The lawsuit hit me like a physical blow. Despite our estrangement, I never imagined my family would take such a calculated step. I immediately called my company's legal counsel, Jack Weinstein, forwarding him the documents. "This is creative," Jack said after reviewing the complaint. "They're essentially arguing they invested in you like a business venture and are now entitled to returns." "They didn't invest anything," I replied, my voice tight. "They took from me at every opportunity." "I understand that, but we need to take this seriously. Family lawsuits can get messy and public. This could affect company valuation and investor confidence." Within days, I assembled a specialized legal team led by Jack and including Catherine Lopez, the lawyer who had handled my emancipation years earlier. After our initial meeting, their assessment was both reassuring and concerning. "Legally, their claims are extremely weak," Catherine explained. "You were emancipated specifically because of financial exploitation, which is thoroughly documented. But they're not really after a legal victory," Jack continued. "They want a settlement. They're betting you'll pay them off to avoid public scrutiny and prolonged family drama." This realization made me even more determined to fight. I instructed my team to pursue every legal avenue, sparing no expense to defend against these fabricated claims. As the legal process began, I discovered my family had been more calculated than I initially realized. Through discovery, we learned they had created a fake social media account to monitor my business activities for years. My sister, the new accountant, had been meticulously tracking news mentions of Local Boost, estimating company valuation based on industry comparisons and funding announcements. Most disturbing was finding evidence that someone had attempted to access company records using my mother's maiden name as a security question answer. Our IT team traced the attempts to an IP address in Millbrook. The security implications were serious enough that we implemented enhanced protection measures for both the company and my personal residence. The chief security officer recommended a comprehensive threat assessment which concluded that while my family was unlikely to pose a physical danger, their financial motivation made them persistent adversaries. The emotional impact of this betrayal exceeded even my emancipation. I withdrew from public company activities, delegating speaking engagements and media appearances to our COO. Sleep became elusive, with nights spent revisiting childhood memories, questioning whether there had ever been genuine affection from my family, or if I had always been viewed as merely a potential resource. Dr. Phillips increased our sessions to twice weekly, as I struggled to process what was happening. "What you're experiencing is a profound re-traumatization," she explained. "The people who should have protected you are once again attempting to exploit you, this time with greater sophistication." The legal proceedings became increasingly public. Local news stations ran stories with headlines like "Family Feud Over Tech Fortune" and "Parents Sue Millionaire Son for Fair Share of Success." Online forums debated family obligations, with commenters divided between those who believed success carried a duty to support family and others who pointed out the exploitative history. Business partners expressed concerns about stability, with 2 potential clients delaying contract signatures, citing organizational distractions. My executive team remained supportive, but worried about the company's image. With guidance from our public relations firm, we implemented a crisis communications strategy, acknowledging the lawsuit while emphasizing the company's continued growth and innovation. The most revealing developments came during the discovery process. Emails between my parents and sister dating back 3 years outlined their strategy for reconnecting with me specifically to pursue financial claims. One particularly damning exchange showed Amber suggesting they needed to establish a reconciliation narrative before filing the lawsuit. During depositions, the family's case further unraveled. When questioned under oath about specific contributions they had made to my early business, my father cited providing garage space and electrical outlets as significant investments. My mother claimed she had emotionally supported my entrepreneurial efforts, directly contradicting documented instances where she had discouraged clients from working with me. The most difficult moment came during my sister's deposition. When pressed about her affidavit claiming I had taken the life that should have been hers, she broke down. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she admitted tearfully. "He was the problem child. I did everything right, the grades, the extracurriculars, college, but he's the millionaire. It's not fair." Her raw admission revealed the true nature of the lawsuit: not compensation for actual contributions, but resentment over my success despite not following their prescribed path. The case ultimately went before Judge Harriet Monroe, a no-nonsense jurist with 20 years on the bench. During the proceedings, my parents' testimony grew increasingly desperate. "We made emotional investments in Ulysses," my mother insisted. "We provided the foundation for his success through years of parenting. Yet you opened fraudulent credit cards in his name," Catherine countered, "forcing him to pay off tens of thousands in debt that benefited your daughter's education." When questioned about their recent home purchase, my parents reluctantly admitted they had taken out a mortgage based on anticipated settlement proceeds from the lawsuit, essentially using me as their retirement plan without my knowledge or consent. Throughout the proceedings, Judge Monroe's expression grew increasingly disapproving. During my father's testimony claiming he had always supported my business efforts, she interrupted to ask, "Is this the same business you referred to as a little hobby in your deposition, Mr. Walker?" After 6 exhausting months of legal maneuvering, Judge Monroe issued her ruling dismissing the case with a strongly worded opinion that characterized my family's claims as thoroughly unsupported by evidence and bordering on fraudulent. She ordered them to pay my legal fees and court costs, a decision that would likely force them to sell their new home. As we exited the courthouse, reporters gathered for statements. My legal team handled most questions while I remained silent until one journalist asked, "Do you have anything to say to your family after this verdict?" Looking directly into the cameras, I simply said, "Family doesn't exploit family. I hope they find peace with their choices." As I turned to leave, Amber rushed toward me, tears streaming down her face. Security moved to intercept her, but I waved them off. "Yuli, please," she sobbed, using my childhood nickname again. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would go this far. They convinced me we deserved part of what you built." Looking at my sister, the golden child who had been given every advantage at my expense, I felt an unexpected wave of pity. "You had your chance to build your own life, Amber. I had to fight for mine. The difference isn't that I took something from you. It's that I refused to let anyone take everything from me." Walking away from that courthouse, I felt strangely hollow. The victory was complete. My family's claims thoroughly rejected their motivations, exposed their financial penalty significant. Yet there was no satisfaction, only a profound sense of finality. The fantasy that we might someday heal this rift had been the last childish illusion I needed to outgrow. The months following the lawsuit resolution were surprisingly difficult. Despite the definitive legal victory, I struggled with lingering anger and a deep sense of loss, not just for the family I had, but for the family I never had. Dr. Phillips helped me understand I was grieving an idealized relationship that had never existed. "You're mourning the parents you deserved, but didn't get," she explained during one particularly difficult session. "That's a necessary part of healing." I established clear, non-negotiable boundaries moving forward. Through my lawyers, I communicated that any future contact from my parents would need to go through official channels. For Amber, I allowed limited communication via email, with the understanding that any mention of financial assistance would end our connection permanently. To protect myself from future claims, I created a comprehensive set of legal shields, including updated trust structures and corporate governance documents that specifically addressed family claims. My financial advisors helped implement additional layers of asset protection, ensuring no one could again leverage personal connections for financial gain. While these practical measures provided security, the emotional work proved more challenging. I found myself questioning business relationships, wondering if new acquaintances were genuine or opportunistic. Trust, already difficult for me, became even more elusive. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a conversation with a young entrepreneur at a mentorship event. Ryan, barely 20, described growing up in foster care and teaching himself programming. Something in his determined expression reminded me of myself at that age. No one believed in me either. I told him sharing parts of my story I typically kept private. Sometimes that's actually an advantage. When you have to prove everyone wrong, you develop a different kind of resilience. That conversation sparked an idea. Within weeks, I had established the Foundations Initiative, a nonprofit organization providing resources, mentorship, and seed funding to young entrepreneurs from challenging backgrounds. We focused particularly on teens who, like me, showed promise but lacked family support or traditional educational credentials. The foundation quickly became my passion project. We converted part of my property into an innovation lab where young developers could work on projects with professional guidance. I arranged for business education scholarships and created apprenticeship opportunities within local Boost and partner companies. One of our first participants was 16-year-old Maria, who had been coding on a borrowed laptop while living with her grandmother. 6 months into our program, she launched a translation app that gained international attention. Watching her confidence grow as her project succeeded gave me a satisfaction deeper than any business achievement. Through the foundation work, I gradually built what I came to think of as my chosen family, a network of mentors, mentees, colleagues, and friends, connected by mutual respect and shared values, rather than accident of birth. Frank, now in his 70s, but still sharp, as ever, served on the foundation board and became the grandfather figure I'd never had. My personal healing journey progressed alongside these external changes. Working with Dr. Phillips, I developed healthier patterns of trust, learning to be selectively open rather than completely guarded. I began dating more seriously, after years of keeping relationships superficial, eventually meeting Claire, an environmental attorney whose straightforward manner and emotional intelligence broke through my defenses. The business continued thriving, with Local Boost expanding internationally and launching new features that further strengthened local economic ecosystems. I found myself increasingly comfortable stepping back from day-to-day operations, trusting my executive team while focusing on strategic direction and innovation. 3 years after the lawsuit, I received an unexpected email from Amber. Her marriage to Justin had ended, and she was rebuilding her life with a newfound independence. She asked for nothing but to share that she'd started therapy to address her own childhood issues and the competitive dynamic our parents had created between us. "I'm starting to understand how they pitted us against each other," she wrote. "I was the good child only in comparison to how they labeled you the bad one. Neither narrative was true or fair to either of us." While I maintained cautious boundaries, this marked the beginning of a tentative limited reconnection. We met occasionally for coffee when she visited Pittsburgh, carefully avoiding topics related to our parents or finances. These meetings were sometimes awkward but increasingly genuine two adults, trying to know each other without the distorting lens of childhood roles. My parents made several attempts to reinitiate contact, particularly after news coverage of the Foundation's success. Each time I redirected them to my lawyers, maintaining the boundaries I'd established for my own well-being. Their persistent focus on what I could do for them, rather than who I was as a person, only confirmed the wisdom of this distance. Looking back now at 32, I can see how each painful experience shaped my path. The early dismissal of my interests pushed me to prove my capabilities. The financial exploitation taught me self-reliance and careful stewardship of resources. Even the lawsuit devastating, as it was forced me to confront and finally release the hope for family approval that had lingered unconsciously. Success, I've learned, doesn't heal childhood wounds, it often magnifies them. Money can provide security and opportunity, but not the validation we seek from those who should have believed in us first. That validation has to come from within, built through consistent self-trust and reinforced by the authentic connections we choose to cultivate. The most profound lesson came through working with young entrepreneurs facing their own versions of what I experienced. Watching them overcome barriers and build their futures showed me that while we can't choose our beginnings, we hold tremendous power over what happens next. Our worth isn't determined by those who failed to see it, but by the impact we create and the lives we touch moving forward. Today, my definition of success has evolved far beyond financial metrics. It's measured in the mentees who've launched their own ventures in the local businesses thriving through our platform in moments of genuine connection with people who see me for who I am rather than what I've built. The house I bought in cash still stands as a symbol of overcoming, but it's the community I've created within and around it that transformed it from achievement into a home. What about you? Have you ever had family or friends try to take credit for your success or expect financial support after you've made it on your own? Drop a comment below, sharing your experience. I respond personally to as many as I can. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life journeys of overcoming obstacles. And if you know someone struggling with toxic family dynamics, sharing this video might help them realize they're not alone. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, your worth isn't determined by those who couldn't see it, but by the vision you hold for yourself.